Today is Sunday the 23rd of October 2022 and you're watching Deprogram video number 38. So before I get into this video, which is a very important topic, especially for this moment in time, I just want to show you how I can reduce a bit over 8 hours of work down to 20 seconds. That thumbnail took me all day doing that. My whole Sunday was spent putting that thumbnail together. It was really not my cup of tea. It's been a kind of a frustrating day, but this is a really important topic, so I wanted to do a good thumbnail. I'm pretty proud of that. I hope it looks good. This podcast thing is really out of my comfort zone, and one of the reasons I decided to start doing it is because I felt like my brain was getting a bit stagnant. I was getting really forgetful. And learning this whole computer thing and then especially today figuring out how to trace around pictures with the mouse, like following the cursor around and deleting and trying to get what I'm about to show you. This 20 seconds took me all day to do. Check this out. The things I'm saying I consider to be very important, and a lot of it I'm not hearing the same perspective anywhere else. So before I start, I'll tell you where we're going with this. This morning I came across a video where one of the elitists from I would say in the club perhaps, gave us the reason for the NATO and the West's attack on Russia. And it's the exact reason I mentioned in a previous video, but now it's coming from someone within the circle. But before I get to that video, I want to just remind everyone of this tweet. Now, this was actually a tweet from Nathaniel Rothschild earlier this year. I saw the tweet with my own eyes, and I had the video saved in my liked videos on brand YouTube. Now, brand YouTube is gone, so I've lost that video. I think I have the tweet in my screenshots in my phone, but I've got like 5,000 screenshots in my phone, and I just want, after doing all day with the thumbnail, I don't want to go digging for the screenshot. Let me know if you want to see the actual tweet, because I'm sure it'll be in my phone. But for now, I'm just going to put up a retype of the tweet because I want to read this to you. Heir to the Rothschild family, Nathaniel Rothschild today wrote to members of the British government giving his view that Vladimir Putin is the most dangerous man since the defeat of Hitler, with Xi Jinping a close second, and explained that Ukraine is an essential piece that we cannot afford to lose in the geopolitical chessboard. The heir to the Rothschild fortune argued, Russia must be excised from the international banking and economic system. We must bring Russia to its knees through any means possible to send a strong signal to the Chinese and to protect our global system of norms and liberal values. We must be under no illusions. If we allow Vladimir Putin to seize Ukraine, it will send a signal to our enemies, Iran, China, and North Korea especially, that we will do nothing when faced with an onslaught of force. In effect, our current path, or lack of military action, means that our global order is dead on its feet. I urge you to deploy more force against Russia and its proxies, step up information warfare to correct opinion, especially online, and send weaponry to our friends in Ukraine. Without Ukraine, the global order may not survive. Now, I'm going to tell you what he's saying there is now is the time to use Ukraine to launch against Russia. Why would they want to attack Russia? Well, I'm just going to take 20 seconds here to run down what happened for anybody that's new to this. In 2014, the United States, through NATO, performed a coup in Ukraine and they installed Vladimir Zelensky. Vladimir Zelensky is not voted in by the people of Ukraine. He was installed by the United States. There was a military coup done against the democratically elected president or prime minister, whatever they call him in Ukraine. I think his name was Yanukovych. He was physically thrown out and Zelensky was installed. The US does this all over the world. It's a common practice. There's a number of books. If you'd like to know about them, leave a comment and I'll post links to some of the books that write about this. There's the one called An Economic Hitman and others. So that the Ukraine has been under the United States control through its puppet Zelensky since 2014. And before the invasion earlier this year, Vladimir Zelensky had been threatening to... He was asking NATO to make him a nuclear power. Now, Russia has always had a red line, going right back to many treaties from decades ago. Russia's red line is, we are sovereign, the West is the West, Ukraine is the buffer. We share a land mass with Ukraine, and Ukraine is our buffer. It's not pro-Russia, it's not pro-West. Ukraine is the buffer between Russia and the West. And that was agreed upon. That was the peace treaty, the global order that was keeping things stable. Through the coup that happened in 2014, there has been this puppet Zelensky in there encroaching on Russia's border with NATO's military. So the US has been getting closer and closer to Russia's border with military bases, and that comes with it the threat of nuclear armaments right on the border of Russia. Now, in my view, you can't blame Vladimir Putin for saying, no, that's not on. You cannot put nuclear weapons in the hands of a puppet right on my border. You know, it's like Mexico saying we're gonna put nuclear weapons here in Mexico, and the United States just saying, oh well, you know, we'll just deal with that. No, that's a red line. If any, let's say Russia said we want to put a military base in Mexico or Cuba or whatever, so that we can have close access to launch nukes into your homeland, of course the United States wouldn't be okay with that. But for some reason, you know, Vladimir Putin's supposed to just accept that. Well, I'm glad he didn't, because Vladimir Zelensky is just a shell of a man who will do anything that he's told. Now that's all historical fact. Now I'm going to speculate on something. Everything that Vladimir Zelensky does, says, wants, asks for is all scripted to him. When Vladimir Zelensky gets up and asks for billions of dollars, he's being told to ask for that. That's so that this is just a massive money laundering scheme. He asks for it, so the world sees that he asks for billions of dollars. The Federal Reserve prints it. They enrich the armaments companies and all the corrupt politicians, and they just enrich everyone. And it's all above board. It's all legit because it's out in the open, because Zelensky needed it. He asked for it openly. The US government told you they're going to give it. It's all legitimate money that they can, you know, there's nothing legitimate about it, but they legitimize it by making this puppet get up and ask for it. So that's the history on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But why? Why is it that the US would want to do this? Well, it seems to me that the American military is almost like a private army of the Rothschild family, of the banking cartels. Going back to that tweet from Nathaniel Rothschild, if you look that up, you'll find all kinds of debunking things. Why would they go to so much trouble to debunk it if it's just a made-up lie? You know, I've seen the actual tweet on Twitter from him. It's not made up. That's what he said. I don't remember all that detail, especially the very last paragraph, but I definitely remember the first part clear as day. That's what he said. And so this is all happening. You saw on my thumbnail I put Muammar Gaddafi. Now, before I get to the main content that I want to share with you, I just want to remind everyone that before they went after Muammar Gaddafi, he had announced that he was going to provide his nation with a gold-backed dinar. And any country that backs their money with gold is going to come in direct competition with the Federal Reserve and the Rothschild and all the elitist banking families. They can't have, because a gold-backed currency is a currency that can't be inflated. Because if you back it with a set amount of gold, you can only produce as much of that currency as you have in physical gold to back it. And that's very limited because gold is a rare commodity. So any currency that's backed by gold will be in high demand, and it will allow gold to finally reach its true value. Gold is heavily discounted at the moment because it's being suppressed by the fiat paper market, the paper gold. You can buy gold contracts, which is not physical gold. You can't exchange them for physical gold. But anyway, the gold price is heavily suppressed, and they can get away with that as long as there's no currency that is backed by gold. Now, Muammar Gaddafi, they make him look like a real criminal. You know, he always wore sunglasses. So you see images like this, I'll put up for you. And people think, they listen to the propaganda and they think, oh, look at him, he's a crook, he's a gangster. Look at him with his Cuban cigar there, he's just a gangster. If you actually listen to Muammar Gaddafi speak, he's a man of God. He's not... Look, I don't want to speak positively about anyone, especially any leader, ruler, because they all turn out to be pedophiles and they are all enslaving. I mean, government is a parasitic institution. That's just a fact, you know. They can't provide anything that they don't first steal from the people. So, you know, people think because Muammar Gaddafi's got his sunglasses on and his Cuban cigar, he looks like a gangster. He might be some sort of a criminal. If you listen to the nightly mind control program they call TV News, you might actually believe that he was a really bad guy. But if you look at what he did for the Libyan people, it's very hard to call him a bad guy. You know, he did more for his people than any Western governments have done for us in my lifetime. All the Western governments have done have extracted our life force energy and given us nothing but stress and sickness and suffering. But then they'll hold up people like these guys because they wear a three-piece suit or whatever that makes them legitimate. These people, they're the criminals. They're the terrorists. These people are terrorists. And as I've said many times, that's evident in the data. You can look into that. You can go through my channel and look under my videos and you'll find links that you can read the evidence that they are terrorists. But the point is, what Muammar Gaddafi had done was install an irrigation network, a network of aqueducts throughout throughout Africa to green the desert. It was the richest country in that part of the world. And once he announced the gold-backed dinar, well, this is what you saw. This is one of the videos I came up with in my research for this video. Bear with the accent. I'll turn the volume up for you and just try to listen carefully to the accent, because this is obviously an African who's explaining this. So listen to this.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
That was former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's reaction following the capture and brutal murder of Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi. According to some, the invasion of Libya was about protecting civilians. Others said it was about Libya's vast oil reserves. But everyone was convinced that it was all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold that would eventually replace the US dollar when trading with Africa. Many scholars have said that it's the kind of thing that one has to plan almost in secret and launch it when ready, because as soon as you say it, you'll have a bullseye on your back. You see, the world relies on the US dollar, giving America unparalleled economic dominance. Nearly 90% of all international currency transactions are in dollars. 60% of foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars, and almost 40% of the world's debt is issued in US dollars. This gives the United States extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything, anywhere. Hillary Clinton's victory lap was explained as mission accomplished for the US NATO intervention following reports of mass atrocities under Gaddafi's regime. It was later revealed that President Obama himself had asked his advisors to draw up options including a new military front in Libya, and the Defense Department was reportedly standing ready with the full spectrum of ground military operations required. Unless you plead temporary insanity, you have to recognize the double standards. There were several other parts of the region in the Middle East and North Africa which pretty much needed humanitarian support, but which the West either ignored or didn't really pay the same amount of attention to. And so the world watched as Western armies pummeled Libya with bombs with the pretext of humanitarian intervention. But the 2016 publication of Clinton's emails revealed another agenda behind the Libyan war, one which it seems was achieved: prevention of the demise of the American buck, as well as prevention of the creation of the independent hard currency in Africa that would have freed the continent from its economic bondage, an outstanding rival to the dollar and the euro, and put an end to the exploitative French African franc. In the months leading up to the military intervention in 2011, Gaddafi called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would ensure they sell their oil and other natural resources around the world for only gold dinars. It is an idea that would have shifted the economic balance of the world, as countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many US dollars they trade or stash. To give some quick context, it is banks, not governments, that create most of the money in Western economies. Originally, all currencies in the world reserves were in gold, but in 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt replaced gold domestically with central bank-created reserves, but gold remained the reserve currency for other currencies worldwide. In 1944, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to unify this bank-created money system globally. This is when 44 countries agreed that the US dollar would be the global currency. Effectively, this meant that the money supply was now created privately as debt at an interest. This system requires a continuous supply of debtors, and over the next half-century, most developing countries, mostly Africa, wound up in debt to the IMF. The loans came with strings attached, including structural adjustment programs that basically stagnated growth of their economies. Under the agreement, the US dollar was pegged to gold, while other global currencies were pegged to the US dollar. When the United States was no longer able to maintain the dollar's gold backing, in the 1970s, it made a quick deal with OPEC to back the dollar with oil, thus creating the petrodollar. It was President Richard Nixon that made the announcement in 1971 that the greenback would no longer be exchanged for gold, a move that was meant to cement US dominance and boost economic growth for the superpower. This is the tricky part. Any other country that purchased oil from OPEC would have to exchange its currency into US dollars before completing the sale. Oil and later any natural resources were priced in US currency, not the currency of the countries where the resources come from. So if the dollar loses value, the natural resources also lose value. This system provided at least two immediate benefits to the United States. It increases global demand for US dollars, and it gives the United States the ability to buy oil and natural resources with a currency it can print at will. This global financial system was created and held in place not by pure economics, but by politics, through the pact with Saudi Arabia, where gold was replaced as the world reserve currency and ultimate store of value. That position was taken by the US dollar. This meant that the ultimate store of value was transferred from gold to the US dollar. Back to Africa, in 2009, President Muammar Gaddafi was named chairman of the African Union, wresting control of a body he helped found and had long wanted to remake his Pan-African image. This doesn't mean that Gaddafi was the best guy on earth. Despite the unprecedented economic success in Libya, he ruled over the country with an iron fist and was accused of funding insurgencies in some African countries. But how he planned to use the post as chairman of the African Union was unclear to the West at the time. In the early 2000s, Gaddafi had tried to improve his relations with Western powers and Western companies by offering to open up key parts of the Libyan economy to foreign investment. Having witnessed the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and later publicly warning at an Arab League summit that America hanged Saddam and we might be next, Saddam Hussein in the year 2000 had announced that Iraqi oil would be traded in euros and not US dollars. We all know too well how that went. Swift sanctions were slapped on Iraq, an invasion, ouster and sentencing of Saddam, and widespread destruction of the country. Violent intervention in Iraq was not chiefly about the security of the people, as was claimed. It was about money and oil and the security of global banking. Gaddafi must have thought to himself that with the rest of Africa backing him, his fate would not be condemned to resemble Saddam Hussein's. Gaddafi was a strong supporter of a long-held dream of transforming Africa, divided by borders that were drawn arbitrarily by Western powers, into a vast unified state that could play a powerful role in global affairs. He had repeatedly proposed immediate unity and the establishment of a single currency, army and passport for the entire continent. The last two perhaps weren't really a bother to Western interests, but the creation of a single gold-backed currency, alarm bells started ringing. Gaddafi's threatened attempt to establish an independent African currency was not taken lightly by Western interests, and their next moves illustrate the lengths the West will go to protect their interests. In 2011, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly called the Libyan leader a threat to the financial security of the world. Of the 3,000 emails released from Hillary Clinton's private email server, one of the emails, dated April 2nd, 2011, read in part, "Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount of silver. This gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan gold dinar. This plan is designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc CFA. This undoubtedly was one of the factors that influenced President Sarkozy's decision to commit France to the invasion on Libya. According to the email, France's plans were driven by the following issues: a desire to gain a greater share of Libya's oil production, increased French presence in North Africa, improve Sarkozy's domestic political situation in France, provide the French military with an opportunity to reassert its position in the world, and lastly, address the concern of the advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plans to replace France as the dominant power in Francophone Africa. Conspicuously absent is any mention of humanitarian concerns. The objectives are money, power and oil, as well as protecting France's stranglehold on Francophone Africa. What made Gaddafi's moves a greater threat to the powers that be was that he did more than just sell his oil in another currency. He had been laying plans for the Pan-African gold currency by 2023 in a bid for African reliance, which would lead to the toppling of the financial system. He had done more than organize an African monetary coup. He had demonstrated that financial independence could be achieved. Gaddafi's most ambitious infrastructure project, the Great Man-Made River, was turning desert regions into a thriving breadbasket for Libya, and the $33 billion project was being funded interest-free with zero foreign debt through Libya's own state-owned bank. That could explain why this critical piece of infrastructure was first to be bombed in 2011. It had been put in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's largest irrigation system. But Western media reluctantly shared news on the project, even though all other projects globally paled in comparison. NATO forces not only bombed the pipeline, but finished off the project by bombing the factory producing the pipes necessary to repair it. So, to the question, why was Gaddafi assassinated by the West? It was all about money and oil and the security of the global financial system. Of course, many people in NATO countries are motivated by humanitarian concern. That is why their governments sell wars as acts of philanthropy. Simply put, generosity sells, but governments do not typically intervene in other nations in order to benefit humanity. There you go, guys. Please let me know in the comments if there are plans to revive the gold dinar currency and how it would transform Africa relations with the rest of the world. Be sure to check out the video on the screen right now to find out the real reason why Africa stayed silent when Gaddafi was removed from power. If you'd like to help out with the channel, please head over to patreon.com/Risen Africa. That's patreon.com/Risen Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.
Okay, so I don't think I need to say anything more about Muammar Gaddafi and the Libyan dinar. Now I want to show you exactly why Russia is under attack. Zelensky and the poor, unfortunate Ukrainian people, they're just in the crossfire. They're just tools that are being used because they really want to get Putin. Because if Putin pulls this off, and look, again, I have to emphasize, I have no love for anyone in politics. But when I see what the Western leadership is doing to children, I just can't support them. I mean, not only I can't support them, that's obvious. I'll support anyone who goes up against pedophilia and all this that's going on. And I think I might have to cut that word out because I want to put this up on YouTube. The immorality that they push in the West. And if you read on Bitchute the description from my channel, you'll understand why they push all this immorality. It's how they keep us enslaved. Vladimir Putin is in a sort of similar to Muammar Gaddafi in the way, if you actually listen to him speak, if you slow down like I've done with when he does his speeches and what have you, I've slowed it right down so I can read every bit of what he's saying in English, and I can look at his facial expressions as he's saying it, and I can read how genuine he is. Is he just reading from a teleprompter? Is he lying? It's just nothing like watching our politicians in the West. You can tell that he is invested in his country. The scumbags ruling over us here in the West, they're the most pathetic puppets, I honestly believe they don't even know what they're going to say until they read it on the teleprompter. That's what it looks like to me. But I could be wrong. That's just how it looks to me. This talk of a gold-backed ruble, this is not the first I've heard of it. This has been talked about in the background now since the invasion. And I'm 100% convinced that this is what it's all about. They would be having, CIA Satanist scumbags in there trying to get to Putin. It's just that Putin's not Muammar Gaddafi. He's got it's a serious nation. The Russian economy it's a big, rich country. That, the Russian army, they can protect their president. I think Muammar Gaddafi was maybe a little bit, olden days style, so they got to him. But it does look to me like this is happening because Russia has threatened. No, they're not even threatening. There's just talk of a gold-backed currency. A gold-backed currency will destroy the fiat order that we're enslaved under here in the West. When Westerners can only have access to fiat money that's not backed by anything, that can just be inflated away as it is, so that our prices can just go up and up and up. And another part of the world like China and Russia, if they were to have this gold-backed currency, that the amount of strength and stability that would give to their currency, it would just be like the nail in the coffin for this fiat system. And this fiat system has made people like the Rothschilds so rich that they will invest everything they have to stop a gold-backed currency from coming into the reality of our world. For them, it's worth it to invest almost everything they have to keep their fiat rulership. It's an investment. As long as they can keep printing themselves rich, they're going to do it. They've got so much money tucked away, so much wealth tucked away, assets tucked away from doing this for so long. But it's a crime. It's the highest crime. The amount of people who have had to die in poverty and suffer and be enslaved by this system, there is no crime that compares to that, maybe except for the democide we've witnessed for the last couple of years. I mean, isn't it interesting how when we were young and we heard about the Second World War and the First World War, we thought, aren't we so lucky to live in peacetime? We don't have to, live with the fear of war. These things that are happening, I mean, this will go down in history. What they've done this last couple of years and what they are still planning to do with this going after Putin, and we're living in serious wartime, and I just think it's very important that everybody have it brought to their attention that the core reason, in my view, and I think it's logical, if you look at the whole picture, if you look at history, what happened with Libya, which has now been totally trashed. They trashed the whole aqueduct system. It went from the richest part of Africa to the slum of Africa. Now there's slaves in the streets is what we hear about Libya now. It's absolutely been bombed back to the Stone Age, and everything that Muammar Gaddafi was so loved. He was loved by the people. He didn't get around with security. He was mobbed, but because he was loved. Everybody cheers for him when you see him speak. So, he enriched his people. Sure, he probably lived the high life too, but he wasn't so greedy that he had to hoard it all for himself. He actually enriched his country. And my feeling is that the leaders in the East, they can see that there's enough for everyone. Now, don't get me wrong, China looks like they're leading the way with this digital slavery. But also keep in mind that China is not sovereign. China only got to where it is because of the Freemasons, that the Sabbatean Frankists that went in there and showed China how to set up this system, which was like the prototype for what they want to spread across the world. It's the Sabbateans, the small hats that actually control China and set it up that way. And yes, thanks to the small hats and the Sabbateans, China did lift themselves out from being a third world, impoverished, a nation of impoverished people, to having the largest middle class in the world. And it's thanks to the small hats in many ways, but at the same time, they're also leading the way with the digital slavery, because that's the prototype model. That's what they want to spread across the world. It seems to me that Russia and China might be of the mindset that there really is enough for everyone, and there can be a large middle class, and they can still have all the riches they could ever want. I don't sense the same level of greed coming from Russia and China as I sense in the West. In the West, they are determined to put us under a digital currency where we pay for carbon, pay for the air that we breathe out, which, as I said, I will die in prison before I pay for breathing out carbon. That's the biggest scam I've ever heard, and on principle, I will not buy into that. I'd rather go and live in a caravan and be completely out of the system than be demoralized by paying for carbon. It's despicable, the level of greed from these people. That just makes me sick. I'm not even going to keep going with that. I want to leave you with this. This is Stansberry Research. Daniella Combone is an economics, like a podcaster, I suppose. She does good interviews. She talks. It's all about economics. Stansberry Research. I'll put a link down below for her channel. I don't know how much of it I'll play for you, but it's very important you hear somebody else saying. He's not saying what I'm saying. He's just talking about the gold-backed ruble, and that will show you why I have this analysis. So I hope that all makes sense. Okay, so before I play you this clip from Daniella Combone interviewing Frank Giustra. Frank Giustra he's a gold miner, and if you watch the rest of this video, you'll see he's also in the olive oil business. But I do believe he's in the club to some degree, because I've heard some rumors about him that are not very, not very good stuff. But the fact that he's also pointing to the gold-backed ruble, in my mind, that explains it all. You listen to this and see what you think.
Hi, this is Daniella Combone, and welcome back to a very special edition of the Daniella Combone Show, joined by a longtime supporter and friend of our show, Frank Giustra, in his beautiful estate here in Orvieto, Italy. Like I said, it's a very special edition and going to be a great interview. Frank, what can I say? I'm without words. The setting.
Well, thanks for coming all this way, and this is a lot more fun than having a Zoom interview.
I was going to say the folks at home might be thinking, what the heck are you guys doing in Orvieto? But, like I was saying offline, we speak a lot, quite frequently, about what's going on in the world events, global events, economic events. But you rarely give interviews. In fact, I could probably count on one hand the number of times we've done interviews. And I always say you really only give interviews when you have something of importance to say, which almost scares me, because I feel like we're about, to embark on something that we don't even know what's in front of us. So that's a little bit about what I want to talk to you about. But here we are in Europe, here we are in Italy. So when we talk about change, a lot of change happening right beneath us right now. Italy's going under a government change, ushering in, a new regime that was not supportive of the euro. A little bit, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the energy crisis. I've been speaking to a lot of people here concerned, as we're about to start the winter, whether they'll be able to to pay the bill. So just let's start by getting your thoughts on the situation in Europe. I know it's a beautiful day and everything looks beautiful, but it's scary times for a lot of folks.
It is, and I think it's a scary time for all folks around the world, but Europe has a very particular problem, which is energy. But as far as let's start with Italy.
Yeah.
We've seen a new government, and it's a far-right movement that is now in power. I personally, from what I know about Italian politics, don't think that this is going to signal some movement for Italy to exit the euro. I think that was a lot of campaign talk. The Italian politics are really pro-euro. And you have to keep in mind that Italy has $2.7 trillion euros, in debt, the second largest in Europe. It can't afford to leave.
Right.
It loves the EU perks. It can make all the campaign noises it wants, but at the end of the day, I don't think for the time being that they're going anywhere.
That's going to start dismantling of the euro.
Yeah, I see the euro in reference to the TV series The Squid Game. So in times of crisis, everybody's initial reaction is every man for himself. But then they realize that you need some teamwork to actually survive, while all the time keeping in mind that at the end of the day, you may end up killing each other.
Right. I think that's really well said. I think maybe the bigger picture, like I said, I have to agree with you. I don't see a quick exit from the euro for Italy. But the fact that they ushered out Draghi, right, Mario Draghi, who was really representative of the system, is that almost the bigger message at play, Frank, is that we'll see this kind of domino effect of people who perhaps want a change from what we've known traditionally.
Yeah, well, we've already seen Brexit. And I think what we have to keep our eye on are the populist movements, like the ones like Hungary with Orban. Those are the really dangerous positions that really endanger the euro system. But I think for the time being, I think the EU is safe for now. I think in the long run, it had structural problems from the beginning. A single currency but individual fiscal policies. It's impossible to manage, and obviously you're going to have resentment between the rich countries and the poorer countries. So I think in the long run, I think the euro system might be in trouble, but not at the moment.
Not at the moment. So despite, as we're speaking, pound is suffering, the euro suffering, US dollar remains dominant. Would you say we're in a full-blown, is this a currency war? Would you define it as such?
I think it's the beginnings of a currency war, and that is I'm absolutely certain that we're heading into a global monetary system reset. And there's so much evidence. If you look at it in terms of chess, there are chess pieces moving all over the place. And although we can't see the end game, you know that the monetary system is in play. And I can give you numerous examples of the indications of where that is taking place, with the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, including other countries like Pakistan and India and Saudi Arabia, enlarging that trade bloc per se. You've got the BRICS coming together, talking about creating their own reserve currency as a basket of currencies, much like the SDRs at the IMF issues. You've got China, obviously, testing its digital currency in cross-border transactions. You got Russia talking about a golden ruble, which is a token backed by gold. You got Russia talking about a golden ruble, which is a token backed by gold. You've got this world, the Moscow gold standard, which has been talked about, to counteract what they see, what the Russians see as Western manipulation of the gold price, so that it's not priced fairly. They want to create their own exchange in Moscow, and they're trying to attract members from around the world so that they can create their own gold standard outside of a system they see as manipulated, so that they can create their own gold standard outside of a system they see as manipulated. So, and there are many, many more. So I'm watching all these pieces, and I'm going, okay, it's in play. It's in play. I can't tell you what the end result is, but Putin and Xi have made it very clear they want an alternative to the US dollar. And although their reasons are more about, the fear of sanctions or the fear of sanctions, The rest of the world is going, hey, this is pretty cool because they've been held hostage for so long by the US dollar supremacy. What's it done? It has gone from beggar thy neighbor policies to beggar, almost bankrupt thy neighbor. Right? You've got the US dollar right now that's going through the roof. It's up 20%. So what's that doing to the rest of the world? A lot of emerging market sovereign debt is priced in US dollars. How are they going to service that debt? IMF bailouts are at a record high right now. Everybody's going, yeah, we wouldn't mind an alternative currency to the US dollar. And for the global south, those that are not in conflict with each other, like the West, Russia-China Act, for the global south, the Indias, the Brazils, the rest, they would love to have a separate alternative trading currency where they can choose to trade with both. They can trade with the US dollar or trade with that, whatever that thing ends up looking like. And that, when it happens, and it will happen in some way, and I doubt it's going to be by consensus. It's going to happen. It's going to be forced upon the US dollar, and then things will change, and the US dollar will lose its status as the supreme dominant currency.
So there's a lot to unpack right there. And like I said, and many viewers have pointed out, your interviews have often been prophetic in nature. So the counter argument to that, right, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that, well, the US will never allow that to happen, that they have so much power and they see all of this happening, but it's never going to happen. What would you say to those folks?
How are they going to stop it? How are they going to stop it when 80% of the world's population wants a change? You know, it's basically the US and the West, so it's Europe and Japan in one camp that would like, well, I can only speak for the US. The US would like the status quo to remain. That's absolutely certain. And they will fight it. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a nasty fight when it comes down to it. But how are they going to stop it? But how are they going to stop it when the rest of the world is stacking up in gold reserves? And they've been doing it for the last 12 years. Every central bank in the world outside of the West is piling on their gold reserves. What do you think they're doing that for?
And that's a separate discussion. I mean, I feel like we don't speak enough about that, about how central banks are, in a sense, quietly buying gold. But does that concern you at all about the U.S. not being the reserve currency of the world? Does that?
Well, it concerns me only from the point of view that I think it may usher in very dangerous times.
Right.
Because it's seldom that global power shifts without conflict. You know, if you look back through history, it's very seldom that there's a power shift from a global leader in finance, commerce, military to another without some form of deadly conflict. And that's the part that worries me.
Would you say it was the sanctions imposed on Russia that fast-tracked this path to the bifurcation of the currency system? Or was it already in play? Was it already happening years ago?
It was already in play because of the China-U.S. relations. That was already in play. China was looking and starting to test ideas as to how to shift out of the U.S. dollar system to de-dollarize. And obviously, they're doing their own thing with gold, which we can talk about. But definitely the Russian sanctions on their foreign exchange reserves and exclusion from the SWIFT system changed, just put it all into...
But this is where I say the U.S., right, must have been aware of that. Like, if we impose these sanctions, we risk, other folks saying, hey, maybe we should get off the U.S. dollar, looking for alternatives. Were they not thinking?
I don't think they were looking that far ahead. I think they were looking at it just through tunnel vision as to the Russia-West conflict over the Ukraine. I don't think they thought it through properly, and I think they maybe miscalculated how much the rest of the world is really ready for a change. Because so not only is the U.S. impoverishing the developing world that have to pay their debts and service their debts in very overpriced U.S. dollars, but the U.S. is also exporting its inflation. By having a much stronger currencies, it makes the imports of all these countries much more expensive. And to the point where the UN the other day begged the Fed to stop raising rates. And, obviously the Fed is focused on salvaging their very poor reputation of managing monetary systems this far. So I think that the world in general is very ready for this. And I think it's going to be hard for the U.S. to stop 80% of the world's population from doing what they need to do.
From what I'm hearing from what you're saying, you mentioned the word gold and this new system in tandem. Let's talk a little bit about what role you feel gold will play in this new system. And to challenge that, I would say, what about digital currencies? There's so much talk about how if there was a new reserve currency, it would be digital in some form. So let's start with gold.
Okay, so Russia, it's obvious what they've done. They, pre the invasion of Ukraine, they de-dollarized, they sold most of their dollars, and now are the world's largest, fifth largest gold holder, okay? So they were prepared for this. They thought ahead. China, they were very transparent about it, so you could see what Russia was doing. China's a whole, and I think China's the key, not Russia. China's a whole different ball of wax. You know, if you know about the Chinese gold reporting system over the last 20 years, it's not transparent by any means. They, several times in the last 20 years, they've stopped reporting, and then they come out, and when they report, gold reserves go much higher. The last time they did that was 2019.
That's right.
And they published that they had 1,950 tons of gold. There's no way on earth that
you don't believe the numbers.
Not even close. Think about it this way. China is the world's largest gold producer, 15% of world gold production and they don't allow the export of mined gold. They're the world's largest importer of gold. They've mined 7,000 tons in the last 15 years. We know what they've mined. We don't know because it's very difficult to gauge how much they've imported. I am absolutely certain the reason they stopped reporting is because I know as a former trader, if you're trying to accumulate something, the last thing you want to do is show your hand because you're going to drive the price up. So they're doing it quietly, and I think that now that the cat's out of the bag that everybody's talking about a monetary reset, I think that the next time they declare, whenever that may be, could be a few years from now, it'll be as part of a new monetary strategy by China.
So let me ask you this. We all know they rolled out a test of their, central bank digital currency. Why was not phase one done with gold? You feel they're saving this? They're going to...
Yeah, I think they're accumulating gold. And I think I wouldn't be surprised. And again, I'm just speculating, but I'm just looking at the numbers of how much gold China is accumulating over the years. It's massive. Since 1995, 46,000 tons have moved from the west to the east, and I think most of that is China. And I think that, again, they, in their minds, need to have a certain amount of gold. Keep in mind the U.S. has 8,100 tons.
Right.
And if gold is going to be part of the new monetary system, it's got to be something that is that they can prove that they can back the currency, whether it's to the tune of 20% or 40% gold backing with the gold that they own.
Okay, so folks might bring up the U.S. gold standard and say, well, Frank, they had stopped the U.S. gold standard. Some would argue it didn't work. Some would say it was working, but they chose to stop it. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, did it work?
Well, it was working better than what happened after 1971. I mean, look what's happened. The dollar since 1971 has lost 95% of its purchasing value. Okay, basically, when they went off the gold standard in 71, they let the dollar float freely. And first of all, you had 10 years of inflation, and that if you held only dollars in your checking account from 1971, it'd be worthless. The purchasing power, it just isn't there.
And, another counter argument would be like, well, why would they look to gold? Gold is, something of the past, Frank. The world it would be a digital currency, whatever people are rolling out, whatever the countries choose to do next. Why not that for you?
Because I think there's been so much faith lost in fiat currencies that if someone were to launch something new, to get the initial credibility, you need to have hard asset backing. I don't know if you saw that Credit Suisse report talking about Bretton Woods 3. Mm-hmm. Very good report. I don't agree with all of it because what Credit Suisse was saying is that the world is heading towards a currency system backed by commodities in general, which I think is going to be too hard to manage or too volatile. The shipping and storage is going to be very difficult to calculate, whatever. Gold, on the other hand, is owned almost universally by all the central banks already. It is viewed as money. It is money.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the new super currency China would be victorious, and it would be some sort of central bank currency. I don't want to say digital, backed by gold.
That's what I believe. Otherwise, why are they buying all this gold and not disclosing it?
So let me ask you an explosive question now. Central banks have been, as we know, hoarding gold, right? Why has the price of gold been depressed given the landscape we're in? Is there a correlation there?
I think there is, but I think it's not being spelled out in what actually is happening. People, I've talked about gold being managed in the past, or someone is directing traffic. But I think if you look at the situation closely, it's really a system of players that, for a combined mutual and individual interest, like the fact that gold stays suppressed, and that is policymakers, the Western banks. And why do they do this? The IMF, why do they do this? Because everybody is profiting greatly by the status quo, where the dollar is the supreme currency and where the West controls the international credit markets. And I think if you look at it, it's not a conspiracy, so you'll never find a smoking gun, because it's not a conspiracy. It's just loosely aligned players with mutual interest. And so I kind of refer it as the Al-Qaeda of the financial world. Not that I want to compare the financial world to a terrorist group, but it's not a top-down command structure. It's a number of people that have a belief system that is keeping them at the top of the game. And I think U.S. dollar supremacy and control of the U.S. international credit markets allows a whole group of players that would love to see gold stay where it is. Because if it starts to move up sharply, it throws a question into the whole system. And so when I talk about manipulation, it's certainly happening at the LMBA level. And we've seen numerous lawsuits where they get fined for, JP Morgan, $1 billion fine for spoofing the markets. But, that's nothing in terms of the amount of wealth that they've created over the decades by being the supreme currency.
So let me ask you this. At one point, because you've spoken about how gold should be much higher. You've spoken about $10,000, $20,000 gold.
I never said that. You've tried to pin me down.
You've spoken about higher gold.
I said a lot higher.
A lot higher. So at one point, does the system break and the true price of gold come out?
Well, I think when and if there's a new global monetary system, which I believe will have some gold backing, and I can walk you through how those numbers would work, and you get that Moscow gold standard in place.
You get that Moscow gold standard in place.
You get that Moscow gold standard in place, so that you take away the trading power from the West and it moves east to Russia and China, where it already exists. Then I think the lid will come off the gold price.
Because I was going to say, investors might say, well, why would I invest in gold if there is, I don't want to use the word manipulation, but there is this kind of common interest to keep it suppressed.
I think, one, you would hold it because it is a store of value. And if you watch the markets and the bond market, these equity markets, the crypto world come crashing down, gold's done okay. I mean, sure, it hasn't gone up, but it's done its job. It's maintained its store of value. But then, as additional insurance, if I'm right, and I think the signs are everywhere that we're heading towards a different monetary system, bifurcated or multiple currencies, then you want to own something that's going to have to be revalued. And I can walk you through the numbers, how that revaluation would work.
I want to say this because the folks at home may say, Frank, it sounds like you're talking about a great reset, which, just a few years ago were conspiracy theories. I mean, are you talking about, is this the great reset?
I think you're seeing the beginnings of. There's no doubt in my mind we're heading towards a reset. I just don't know what it looks like at the end of the day. I just watch all of the indicators, like the accumulation of gold. And you think about, since 2010, all the central banks around the world have been buying gold, right? Every year, all of the non-Western countries.
Right.
Brazil was late to the game. In 2020, they came in 2021 and they doubled their reserves in just 1 year. They went from 60 tons to 120 tons. So I think everybody is preparing, setting the stage.
I want to zone in on the U.S., but first you mentioned the new Moscow gold standard, which would challenge basically the LBMA. How pivotal is that for you? Is that something we should really be focusing on? Is it a non-event? How important is it?
I think you have to view it as a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's an important piece, but to me, it's a lesser important piece than what is happening in terms of all of these conversations by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the BRICS, China, Russia, the rest of the world clamoring for something different. Okay, so it's just one piece of a mosaic that I see kind of unfolding in front of my eyes.
I want to talk about the U.S. because I know you've written in depth about how the Biden administration is looking at regulating cryptocurrencies, and it looks like it's happening faster than many people thought. I know, speaking with you, you've said they will not want a competing currency, and they'll do everything to stop Bitcoin. I've spoken to other experts on the flip side who will say the U.S. will not want to be last in this race. If Bitcoin is the future, they're not going to want to ban it. They're going to want to be ahead of it. I want to really get your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think you have to separate what the U.S. really wants is to be ahead of the game on blockchain, not Bitcoin particular, or some form of digital system that they can eventually take over. And that's, they're going to create their own central bank digital currency like everybody else in the world. And they're not going to want competition. I see Bitcoin as an anti-sovereign fiat play. And if I'm right about a monetary reset where everybody's going to something else that incorporates digital currencies in that whatever they create, the last thing they're going to want is the competition from Bitcoin. And as I said a year and a half ago during our debate with Michael Saylor, eventually they will want to take Bitcoin out. I think there's too much risk there.
And I want to get back to the debate in a second and bring it up. But on the topic of privacy, right? Is there going to be a way, if everyone's ushering in a digital currency, we've spoken about the dangers and what this will mean for our privacy, will there ever be a way to be outside of the system, or this is it?
The only thing that I can think of, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, okay, here, I'm just speculating, but the only thing I can think of is have some physical gold, okay? I think everybody, and I mean everybody, should own some physical gold. And that means according to your wealth, okay, in relationship to your wealth. Even if you own one coin, it's $1,700 a coin. Recently I saw that there was a discovery in the UK. They were building a house and they found a pot of gold that was 250 years old. Today's gold has the same purchasing power as that gold had back then. It's all relative. And in the meantime, paper currencies have come and gone, been destroyed, been inflated away. Own some gold is all I can say. I don't have any other answer because they can't attack your coin of gold. They can certainly, if they wanted to, attack anything that's out there in the digital world.
Is that a scary future for you? I mean, you have kids. Are you thinking, and I have young kids, and I'm thinking, like, is this, this is the world we're going to grow up in? Zero privacy. I mean, does this keep you up at night?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we're heading to a 1984 Orwellian world. I really do. I'm not sure what one can do to stop it if everybody does it. America's going to do it. China's done it already. I don't know what world we're going to do it. I don't like it.
Do you talk about it with your kids?
Not in detail, but certainly, I'm the chairman of an organization that is trying to prevent conflict around the world. And so I know a lot about the geopolitical conflicts, and I've studied history, and I see patterns that emerge over and over again. And I tell my children that we're going through a change and that they have to be prepared to see some difficult times ahead. And, and I coach them, where they should live. And, obviously they're going to do what they're going to do.
Where should we live? I want to know. Tell me. Here.
Canada.
Oh, I'm going to stay right here. You're not getting rid of me.
The weather's nicer here.
You mentioned the debate. As we know, it's made history. It's the greatest debate ever on Bitcoin versus gold. We're 1 year and a half already.
Yeah.
Looking back, right, there was a lot of big statements made during that debate. One thing I want to bring up, because I never got a chance to ask you. This is the first time you've come back on my show since the debate, I think. The gold sector gets a lot of heat. One thing we often hear is they don't do a good job of marketing gold. Look at what Bitcoin's done. And one thing Michael Saylor brought up during the debate is, how come the miners don't even hold the product themselves on their balance sheet? Barrick doesn't hold gold on their balance sheet. Should they? Was that a fair comment he made?
I think it's only fair from the point of view that they've done a lousy job of marketing up until now. And what they've just, the World Gold Council just announced a couple of weeks ago that they're creating, and I know it's been in the works for about a year now, a token backed by gold, a digital token backed by gold that's accessible, easy accessible, like Bitcoin is. It's fungible, and it's basically modernizing the way that people can invest in gold. So that's a really great improvement from having done not a great marketing job in the past. But I think to answer the question directly about gold mining companies, I know that about 20-something years ago, a gold mining company in Canada tried that. They said, well, we're not going to, we're gold. The founder, Rob McEwen, was a gold bug, and he really believed in gold. He said, no, we're going to keep our gold, and we're not going to sell it for dollars, whatever. The problem is you're a publicly traded company that's trying to attract institutional investors, and the institutional investors didn't like that idea. They wanted to see earnings. They wanted to be able to project cash flows so they could do their multiples. So as great as his motivation was, and in a way he was right, because he's saying this when gold was $250, $300 an ounce. He would have lost a lot of, it's just not the world of public companies trade in.
And, obviously, if we look at the price, you look at the price of Bitcoin now. When we did the debate, we were around the 60,000. We're now around the 20,000 mark. You're just smiling.
Well, God, again, and I've said this so many times, it didn't take a PhD in math to be able to see that Bitcoin was perfectly correlated with speculation stocks, the NASDAQ, all this crazy stuff. And it was a bubble. Anybody could see it was a bubble. Any person who had been around long enough could see it was a bubble.
I know what was fueling you, what was angering you, is the talk of, mortgage your house, sell everything.
It was the worst advice. And, there were several players out there, not just Michael Saylor, but others that were saying, sell everything, put everything to Bitcoin. And I thought that was the most irresponsible and stupid thing that people could say. And I that's the reason I asked you for the debate. I was angry that he was getting away with it.
I know we're going to take a walk amongst these beautiful grounds of yours, but I need to get your thoughts a little bit, on the Fed. I know you've been very, very critical. You've come out saying you feel the inflation numbers are actually much higher. They're actually suppressing the inflation numbers they're giving us.
Yeah.
Just thoughts on where you think they're headed. How much longer can they tighten for?
I think the pivot is around the corner.
Really?
I've said all along, I said it in 2009, and I said it for the last 15 or so years, they cannot raise rates. It's mathematically impossible. They cannot unwind the balance sheet. It's mathematically impossible. And they've convinced the marketplace time and time again that they would raise rates. They tried it in 2016. They failed. They've had so much heat now for being wrong. And the Fed's been wrong for 20 years. But they've had so much heat that they're now trying to improve their image by talking tough. And they're trying to talk inflation down by saying, we're going to keep raising rates to 4.5%, blah, blah. They'll never get there. At 4%, the U.S. government debt is $30 trillion. That would be $1.2 trillion in interest costs. The math doesn't make any sense. You got $300 trillion worth of debt around the world, which has doubled in 10 years. How are you going to implode the entire system if you raise interest rates? So I think they're going to find an excuse. And I think the excuse is being given to them. They're exporting their inflation around the world. Countries are screaming. They're looking for IMF bailouts. Something's going to break. In America alone, it now takes 50% of the average household income to pay a mortgage. Credit card debt is at its all-time highs. They're going to break. Something's going to break.
If the U.S. loses its reserve currency status, can it still remain the superpower, or will it also? eventually?
I think it's a long way off. It's not like Rome with the barbarians at the gate. I think, it's got 700 military bases around the world. I don't think it's going to go anywhere I'm afraid that it finds an excuse for military action to protect its its supreme status. I'm afraid that it finds an excuse for military action to protect its supreme status. And that's the only thing that worries me.
Here we are in your beautiful estate where you share your other passion, which is olive oil. You have Domenica Fiore, #1 olive oil in the world. How did you decide to, you're obviously very successful, and how do you decide where you want to, or what you want to be involved in? Why did you choose olive oil?
Passion. It's just passion. Listen, I love food. And I know you do too. So we're Italian by heritage, so we love food. And I've been cooking my entire adult life. My friends love to cook. I discovered the idea of olive oil by just visiting this location. It's another house, but for many, many years and tasting the olive oil that came from this region, it just blew my mind. And so being curious, I rallied a bunch of good friends around me, and we said, let's go in the olive oil business. This is great. And not only that, but let's make the best one in the world. And it sounded a little bit bold at the time, but you know what? Our olive oil continuously wins #1 in the world over and over, all the international contests. It is, in my opinion, the best in the world. And, I named it after my mother.
Beautiful.
For her, I'm proud, and I'm sure she was very proud because she knew, she saw it all happen before she passed away.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because, offline we were speaking how you came from very humble beginnings and how gold perhaps would have saved your family, you were saying, because they had fled Argentina, so during hyperinflation.
Yeah, so I grew up, I grew up in Argentina until I was 9 years old. My whole family did. And my father had invested in some businesses down there. He was hoping to, he was a miner. He was a driller and a blaster, worked underground, not a great life for him. He did that for so many years. So he wanted to get out of that. And so the Argentinian thing, that time Argentina was in pretty solid shape. It was one of the wealthiest countries in the world in the 60s. And then he saw the change start. He saw the Peronist movement taking shape and that the country was falling apart. And he decided to move us back to Canada. And then he tried to get his money out. He got into some litigation with some of his partners. And so he didn't get his money out in time. By the time he received his payment, maybe 5 years later, it was worth zero. Hyperinflation had taken hold in Argentina, true hyperinflation, and made the currency worth. He lost everything he worked for over hyperinflation, and he didn't have any gold. So,
and you're saying gold would have saved the family?
Absolutely, because gold, always keeps its value over any paper currency.
And this is perhaps a bigger question for another interview, but all this said, can America's economy be saved at this point?
No, I wrote an article recently. It was titled "How to Fix a Broken American: 4 Easy Steps That Will Never Happen." That was basically my idea of the article. And basically it was a diagnosis without a realistic cure. And I pointed to 4 things that are almost unique to America and not elsewhere in the world. One is money in politics. Since Citizens United, the Supreme Court case, the creation of super PACs, you can buy any politician you want because now you can spend as much money buying politicians. And it's very reminiscent of the late Roman Republic when senators were being bought
But it
off.
would all be disclosed with a digital currency.
Well, no, but it's not about disclosure. They can do it openly. They're just, super PACs have raised about $3 billion. You know that in the last election, $14.5 billion was spent on a U.S. election. That is ridiculous. I mean, you can obviously, if you're rich and powerful and you have an interest that you want to protect, whether you're the pharmaceutical industry that spent almost $500 million last year on lobbying. Whether you're the pharmaceutical industry that spent almost $500 million last year on lobbying, or the defense industry, which spent $120 million, or the oil industry, all of that money, I mean, they spent a total of $4 billion on lobbying. They have 12,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they spent $4 billion last year in lobbying efforts. It buys a lot more than a three-martini lunch. It just buys your influence to be able to control and protect your interests, which is usually not always in the best interest of the public. So that was number one, was take money out of politics, but it will never happen. Two was shorten the election cycle. You have this ever-ending election cycle every 2 years with campaigning that starts 200-300 days in advance. It's a continuous election cycle that you never see anywhere in the world. And as anybody knows from politics, you say what you need to say to get elected, but then you have to govern. And there's no chance to govern because they're always campaigning. You compare the election cycles in the U.S. to, say, Canada or Mexico, where they last 3 months. But in the U.S., it's like all the time, and you can't govern when you're campaigning. So shorten the election cycle somehow. And again, I'll say none of these things are going to happen. A flat tax. Just the biggest corporations, the biggest Fortune 500 companies pay zero income tax. Okay? And a lot of them get credits so that they have a negative tax rate. And no matter what you do to change the tax legislation, they can afford very expensive lawyers and accountants that always find a loophole, and I can show you the evidence. You can go to my article and read it, that shows you the evidence of how they've done that over the years. If you had a flat tax, 15%, no deductions, and you put a bottom on it so the poorest don't pay any tax. There's a certain level at which you start paying tax. You don't disadvantage the poor. Four, I think you have to do something about the Fed. The Fed is, to me, a government-backed cartel of bankers that have no real interest in the real economy, and they're either extremely incompetent or they're complicit. And the reason I think that they're complicit is because they only criticize Fed actions after they retire. Greenspan, Bernanke, all these guys, while they're in power, they toe the line. And to me, it's a cozy relationship. And I don't think I think they've ruined the American dollar. I think they've ruined the American economy. They printed all this money unnecessarily. They'll never be able to
But they're
unwind
supposed to be the smartest economists.
They're not.
Okay, but
maybe they are. But if they're really smart, they're incompetent. They're
Frank
complicit.
Justra talking about end the Fed?
I don't know. I don't have the answer of what to do. And I said in my article, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that the current system's not working, and it's not doing justice to the American people.
Was there any Fed chair you liked?
Volcker. I mean,
but he took a tough road.
But he did it when there was very little debt in the system and they could afford to take a road. Sure, they took some economic pain for a couple of years, created a recession. But if Powell tried to do what Volcker did, he would implode the entire planet. You can't do it. There's too much debt.
And the system just can't. I don't think it can sustain the tightening cycle.
No, it won't. And I've said it all along. I thought that the cap was going to be 3%.
Right.
They might get it to 3.5%, 4%, but they can't go past 4%. There are many reasons why they can't do it.
Well, if they revert back to QE, let's say, what happens to inflation? I
think we're going to live in a stagflationary world for a while, and there's nothing they can do. They're stuck. They've been in a box, and I've told you this years ago.
I can't see the way out.
There's no way out. They made the mistake a long, long time ago. The only thing that's going to change things now is a reset of the entire global system.
Right.
That's the only way out.
It makes sense.
And there will be pain that comes with it, but there's no other answer. There's no way to unwind this problem. So I think that the Fed created the problem in the first place, and now they're in danger of putting everybody over the cliff because they want to talk tough. But I think they're just basically exporting their inflation and trying to talk inflation down as opposed to actually tackling it in any meaningful way with really aggressive rate hikes. So that's the Fed.
And that's why I don't want to keep going back to cryptocurrencies, but I'm surprised that or blockchain does it appeal to you in the sense that it challenges the current status quo? In a sense, it challenges the system.
Yes, in a in an alternative world where we didn't live in reality,
Yeah.
and I mean the reality of the kind of geopolitical world we live in, with the competition that takes place and the power and the fight for power
Right.
and market share and whatever, in this world, they won't let something that they can't control take over the system. I always said, I think blockchain and even the cryptocurrencies were a great utopian vision that in a real world will never work in the long run. They won't let it happen.
I want to talk a little bit about life with you. I know we're going to walk through your beautiful grounds here. We're at your estate where you press Domenica Fiora olive oil, one of the greatest olive oils in the world. We're going to taste some, I hope.
So as you can see, the financial reset is coming. It has to come because the inflation has already been done. As I've said many times, they've already printed enough money to destroy all the Western currencies. We're just sort of waiting for that money to be spent into the system as prices keep going up. And then they're going to come to the rescue with the CBDC that counts how much carbon you breathe and has a time limit on it so you can't save your money. It has a location limit on it so you can't use it outside of your little home imprisonment area. It will even have limits on it where if you've eaten too much meat that week, you can't buy any more meat, but you can get plenty of crickets and cockroaches and whatever else they're, trying to get away with. These Western politicians are so deeply evil that I just can't believe we're living in a time where we have to sit back and watch this. I'm just dying for the day to arrive when influencers who have an audience finally see the sense in joining together and helping us to create a movement whereby we have that assistance, that organisation, which we cannot do by ourselves. The resistance during the previous wars was done through radio. There was influencers that had like pirate radio stations, and that's how they organised themselves during the other wars. So it's not like people can organise ourselves without any means of doing it. We do have a much bigger population now, so the only way we can actually use our strength in numbers, and I'm not talking about for violence, I'm talking about for peaceful action, but physical action in the world. As I've said many times, I believe we need to be sharing the data of the truth of what's actually happened. But you're not going to find one person here and there that's going to bother doing that. We all need to do it, and the only way we're all going to do it is when influencers join together and absolutely bomb the internet with one message. It just seems so logical to me. I don't know why I can't get anyone else to understand it. But look, I'm not going to give up. I don't even know who to share my videos with anymore. That's the thing. It's very difficult for me to figure out what to do with this because you get to a point where you're sort of sick of people ignoring you. It's like, I'll just publish the content, and when the time's right, the right people will find it. But if you can help me get it across to the people, the influencers that could do something about this, I'd really appreciate that. I hope you see that what I'm talking about, this financial reset that has to happen, it looks like it's going to be a bit of a rocky road, but if we can bring justice into this world, it does look as though with a little bit of an awakening, the whole world could learn that we have to have what we use for trade, the currency that we use for trade needs to be money, not currency. If we can get that education out to the television watchers, that's the ticket to freedom. You cannot be free while you have to work your blood, sweat and tears for the same medium that the bankers can just print. They're always going to enslave you when they have that advantage. But there's no reason they should have that advantage. And this is why gold is so such a precious commodity because it is actually money. It can be used as a unit of account against all products and services. It's a perfect unit of account. Silver is too for smaller services and cheaper products. This is, the government and the media try to make out like everything's so complicated, but everything's only complicated because they make it complicated. The truth is, prosperity is simple. There are some very simple principles for mass prosperity, and they've actually had to complicate it to put us into this maritime slavery, debt-based fiat nightmare that is just practically like hell on earth. Why should we live like this? We only get one life, and for some reason people seem satisfied to sacrifice their life for this handful of demons to live off us. It's just so unacceptable. So I'm just going to keep plugging away at this. I hope you got some value from this video. I think it's a very important topic. I think the threat that the world faces, because I do believe these banking families will annihilate the whole planet before they give up their ability to just print themselves into infinite wealth. I think there's nothing that they won't do. So let's all get our eyes on them and make sure that they know that we know what they're doing, and we want to see them stripped of everything they have before they are executed. That's the only just thing that can happen in this world. Until that happens, we are not living in a just world. And, well, as long as we just face the facts and see that that's the truth, that's the best we can do for now. I've put my whole weekend into videos this week, so I'll look forward to next weekend. I'll be with you again, and thanks for taking the time to listen. God bless everyone. See you soon.